There's a lot of us who really like to know how things are made, and that's what this is intended to be. It's a behind the scenes look at how different facilities and projects that I've worked on get put together from the early ideas all the way through a completed project. And because every facility is so unique, the owners are different, the locations are different. Most importantly, the intent and the goal for each project can be so different that even though I talk in videos about different ways of looking at things, the way it gets applied to each project is extremely unique because of all of the different circumstances involved. So that's what we're going to get into. And we're going to start with the first project I did with Brooklyn Boulders, which was in Somerville, Massachusetts. It's now a bouldering project, and that's where we're going to start. But I'm going to do a series of these videos going through different projects that I've worked on and projects that we've got coming up as well. And so hopefully this is a way to sort of see behind the scenes how I look at working with clients to make world-class projects on time, on budget, the best we can. So let's go. So Brooklyn Boulders Somerville is now a bouldering project, the Boston Bouldering Project. And some of these slides I had shown in a talk that I gave at CWA, but I'm going to go quite a bit beyond that right now. So one of the things that is always interesting to look at is that these projects take so long to be put together. They take, years. In this case, the Brooklyn Boulders was really something that started back when, I was just out of graduate school. I finished graduate school in 2009. I was working as an architect in the Boston area. And I remember, I think, having to take time off of work or something like that to go tour this building when these pictures were taken. And it's really funny to sort of look at it now, seeing what it was. In this case, there was some storage in it. It was a building that clearly could fit a climbing gym, but, how could we make it a true venue, like a true world-class venue on a budget that was extremely low? So this project was the second Brooklyn Boulders after the first one that was in Brooklyn. And it was the first one that I had jumped into. And so the very first thing that we did was, as a team, it was a team of, I think it was about 4 of us working on this. And the very first ideas were, how can we put this thing together? What do we need to do, especially knowing that the Boston market already had climbing gyms? And so from the beginning, the idea of, do we make this thing have a taller roof section? So right here is where the roof is popped up. This does not exist in the existing building when we're making these models. But the decision to get walls that were pushing the 50-foot height was a decision at the very beginning. And the whole facility really kind of orients around that because, and it was done for a number of reasons. One was just to be sure that we weren't going to be sort of outpaced immediately if someone were to come in with walls that were closer to, say, 50 feet. And so that isn't a big deal, but it took a lot of work to actually be able to raise the roof, remove part of the existing roof, build effectively a new structure within it, and then put the climbing walls on top of that. And so some of the things I would point out when I look at this would be things related to, the locker room block is effectively where it was. There's these sort of lounges. And often what is really being captured in these early models is scope. This is not what the final product is, but we've got lockers, we've got a mezzanine, we've got lounges, we've got this sort of desk that, allows for circulation around it. We've got these other program blocks. We've got this sort of long bike storage area that is the main entry. And we've also got the sort of central boulder right when you walk in. We've got, I think this was an arch at this point. We've also got a sort of specifically a kids area. We've got different zones like right here that's sort of off the beaten path, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then there's more stuff in the back here. There's a big window that the idea from the very beginning was to maintain a line of sight basically all the way through. I missed the window there, but you get the idea. And then there's this existing block in the back that was just this concrete block thing. And so, when I look at an image like this, I really do see a lot of the core elements. And for anybody who's worked with me on projects, it starts even a step before this with some usually pretty sketchy sketches. And it is always interesting to me, and I think clients would vouch for this, where it's pretty remarkable how those sketches are really just trying to illustrate core ideas for the project. And they very quickly actually do turn into 3D models that are often, again, this is not a good model. I'm not saying it is. What I'm saying is that it embodies ideas that persisted all the way through the whole project. And I think that's what's important, is being clear with your ideas, being confident with ideas, being strong enough in your assertion that the ideas are actually good ideas, that you actually do push and fight for them, because it's not always easy. And so the model itself evolved quite a bit over the time of working on it. And you can see, just even looking at it, the sort of detail. And this model is actually showing the walls that were developed by Vertical Solutions in this case. So in this model, we are effectively showing sort of look and feel, like different types of features that we may want, like where a sort of steep boulder is versus, the sort of main lead feature, things like that. In this particular, or, in this case also like a sort of teaching slab, things like that. In this case, there are a lot of things missing and a lot of things that got developed and a lot of things that got changed. But the wall layout you're seeing here is, again, a pretty direct sort of evolution of the model we were just looking at. And when we were doing the actual project, this was a place I used to stand a lot looking down through the facility when it looked like this or even worse. But, things that you can see that we already had talked about. So even though this is a much more advanced model, some of the things that you can see are, say, that window at the very end. And so there is a line of sight going all the way through that. That's no accident that this wall is a big glass wall. It's no accident the way that you circulate through the project, the way that you can walk all the way through or get sort of collected into these eddies, which are around other sides of the walls and things like that. And so, when I talk about climbing walls and architecture being the same thing, that's what I'm really talking about, is that the unique aspect of a climbing gym is that it's a climbing gym and that it's got climbing walls in it. So in order to, a workspace in a climbing gym, often they're not even very good workspaces, but the unique part is that it's in a gym, or same thing with cardio equipment, whatever it is. So I think that it's often important to keep that in mind as things are developed, because the more we can take advantage of the climbing walls, incorporate them into the whole facility layout from the very beginning, that's really how, in my opinion, you get the most bang for your buck, and you've got the best chance of creating a truly world-class project, regardless of your budget. So again, construction, always messy. This project, very messy, which is a different conversation that I'm just not even going to get into. But what you can see here is, coordination between the steel that's going in for the mezzanines, the climbing walls being put together, and then the roof that I don't think had even been completed at this point. And the final product, a lot more shiny, a lot more polished than this, which is what you can see here is the way that the roof was being dropped. And so these are temporary scaffolding things like shoring that are, these temporary beams are effectively replacing the columns that were holding up these bar joists and being replaced with these columns, which are going through these holes. You can see these mega columns, which are going up way past what you can see. And these new columns, and actually you can see it right here, this plate, which is probably about 1.5 inches, maybe even almost 2 inches thick, that was what these new columns were sitting on. And so these existing columns got cut off. a new base plate was put over them, and then the new column was dropped in through the roof, put in place, and shored into plumb and whatnot. And so while you're doing that, you can see what's happening. There's some openings in the walls on the perimeter that we're going to be attaching to stabilize. And this there was a lot going on this project. It was, again, very, very sort of budget minded, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But when we look at this, the layout of the facility, while I say that it is sort of equally about the climbing and the architecture and the way they work together, it's really about the movement through the space. And so the skateboarders in this picture, I think, are really just a more extreme example because they, stick to the concrete surface. And the way that sort of movement through the facility is organized, I think it has a lot of similarities to the way like a river might be flowing. And so using these areas off to the side as ways to collect people, just like an eddy, ways to allow for certain visuals, lines of sight to go all the way through, versus other areas that's not possible, to create these eddies or these sort of secondary zones that may interact with each other, these sort of microclimates almost within a facility. I think this is an analogy that we've used for a long time when looking at facilities, is this sort of the difference between different users, even the same user on different days, or even different times of the same day, maybe in a different mood. Sometimes they might want to show off. Sometimes they might want to train. Sometimes they might want to just sort of be alone. And this can all be the same person, let alone wildly different users, professional, first timer, kid, grandparent, whatever it is. There has to be some flexibility that is being put into the project. And that's why when we look at the final plans for the project, the way that we put these main pieces, these sort of boulders or these rocks, if you imagine the facility as like a river, there's movement sort of going all around and through the facility. That's the movement that we're really choreographing with the way the building and the architecture is laid out. And so these cores are very crucial. And so what are they? We've got a locker room core. We've got this sort of event room lounge. We've got this party room. All of those rooms have mechanical equipment in some way. So whether it's drains or water supply or like a kitchenette or a fireplace in the lounge, they all have things that are hard to move. And so these are the things that we have to locate in a way that maximizes potential around them and relationship between things. I don't care if things are circles or squares or whatever. It's the relationship between them and around them that defines how the user experience is and how they move around them. So again, these sort of boulders in the space. Same thing over here in the middle. This is where the root setting equipment is. So there's a bunch of plumbing over here. And then there's an existing bathroom in the back. And then in the lower right, there is the elevator and one of the stairs we needed to put in. And so as you start to kind of look at the space, there are in one big open space. So the pink boxes are effectively like the closed spaces, but there are all these little zones that are developed within that. And so there's a lot of variety, even though there aren't that many walls, meaning like building walls. And that's very intentional for some of the reasons we were just describing. And so some of these, the experience of how do you enter the facility, what can you see, walking in through the main entries in the upper right up here, what happens when you come in here? You're entering in the door here, you've got this sort of interesting look down the hallway. From the front desk, you can see through this glass door. From the sort of cafe room, you can see all the way across, like we were talking about at the beginning. And then you've got these different zones that are being set up, some of which are set up that they can even really be like seating zones. And you can really be looking at some of these climbing walls, like, imagining how these things might be used in different situations by different users at different times. There's a lot of uses that you're not going to even be able to imagine. And that's, what we saw in this project as it was being used was people coming in and really kind of making it their own, which was exciting. And, I think we did a decent job of providing space for that. And so on the mezzanine, so we were looking at the ground floor plan here. This is the mezzanine. I'll talk about how that was positioned in a minute. The mezzanine itself is a little bit more than just like a simple rectangle. It is behind the wall here. So you can see this is like the main tongue, like big, huge lead wall. There's a stair that goes behind it. This becomes an eddy for teaching. You can see over it. You can't really see into it. Same thing up here. This is a secondary bouldering wall. It's a little shorter. It's a little less steep. It's got great views, but it's perfect, especially for people who are maybe a little intimidated, or, I used to climb up there all the time. And then cardio that's in a sort of prime position for views, taking advantage of, again, the fact that you're in a climbing gym. That's what it is. So the more we can use that and take advantage of these different lines of sight, not only for people sitting and working or riding a bike or doing, cardio or bouldering, whatever, but also people as you move through the facility. The actual movement through the facility is something that I've always thought is a very important part of it. And, that's why, again, the sort of skateboarders and the eddy of a river, the way that a river might be, sort of function in different ways as it encounters these objects, or the way a user moves around it, it's very unique. And we're using objects and setting up relationships between objects in a larger space so that different users, and even users we haven't even imagined yet, can make it their own and take advantage of what the ambition is to be just a wild space, and a space that people just come in and are just blown away by. And when we look at the sections, one of the things that I think is important that, I talk a lot about with clients is just getting the most out of the things we have to do. So you have to build bathrooms. So where do we put them? In this case, we decided we had to build a mezzanine. So how high is it? What is the height above it, both in the new roof section, in the lower roof section, and then in the existing roof, and then below it as well for the rooms there. And then when we put a mezzanine above the other main bouldering wall, that was a little taller. And, that was to let that boulder be the sort of huge boulder that it is. And so just simple decisions about how we calibrate the building, how much height we leave for different things. That's why, again, the architecture it's this back and forth between the climbing and the architecture, which is why I think it has to be thought of at the same time, at least in the way that I view these things. And that is a personal thing in a lot of ways, because I've been a wall designer, I've been an architect, and I've been a developer of climbing gyms. And so I sort of look at the whole process. I can't not look at it that way. So I think that's the way to do it. That's the way I do it with clients, where we go from here to here. And again, these objects that we're putting in place are really these sort of fixed pieces that people then interact with. And I think I like skateboarding analogies. I'm a horrible skateboarder, but the way that the skateboarders sort of take objects and do crazy things on them is exactly what happens in these facilities. And we'll see some pictures of that. Here are some finished photos. You can see the difference in height between the bouldering wall up here, the bouldering wall on the main level, the mezzanine above that boulder, the cardio equipment, and then the other rooms in the back, and the sort of other areas. And, different ideas like these hand washing sinks that you can see here, different thoughts like that. There were different things being tested. And, this facility, again, it was done over a decade ago at this point. And so some of these ideas I think have persisted. Some have, shown to be maybe not the way to do things. But either way, you have to figure that out somehow. One thing here, these are windows that when you actually are up here and you look out them, you can see downtown Boston. And so, even though these projects are often sort of very internally focused, meaning, it's about what's going on inside, whenever we have opportunities to give views, whether it's a view looking in or views looking out, those are great opportunities to be looking into. And so, a lot of the times those are the special moments in a facility where you find you find a location that is sort of where you like to be. For me, I always liked standing back here. It is pretty cool when you're climbing up here and you can see out. And so, these are sort of privileged positions sometimes that you have to climb the wall to get this view. Other ones are more sort of attainable for people who aren't necessarily climbing. But the point is that, a lot of these are, again, coordinating the architecture, using our budget as carefully and as powerfully as we can. So we didn't put windows everywhere, but we did put in a decent amount of skylights. We did put in some windows in key places to be able to really sort of make it pop. And again, the uses evolved. TED Talks, different events. I always like these light up events. You can see that big window in the back. That was a window that there was a header or a steel beam that was already there and it was filled in. And so, that was an opportunity to, yes, you had to pay for the glass, but no, you didn't have to pay for a whole bunch of structural work. So when we, again, looking at the architecture and the climbing at the same time, and from a budget and a construction point of view, what can we do to use the things that are already there in this case? So this is an existing building. What can we use? We used some of the lighting, which, wasn't great, but it certainly saved a lot of money. Using some of the characteristics of the building in very different ways than it was intended to be used, but using these things to save money and apply the budget we do have, apply that powder in smart ways. The sort of amphitheaters within the facility that are not necessarily obvious when it's a sort of day use climbing situation, but when you see all these people kind of organized in one area and it works well, that these are different things that I would say more and more are baked into projects, because I do think this project had a lot of sort of novelty to it. It got a lot of press for the workspace, for the architecture. We worked with Aero Street and Vertical Solutions on this. And, it was just a project where I think we tested a lot of ideas. And I think since then, we've seen a lot of gyms also use some of those ideas, which is what happens. And my response has always been, yeah, this project was in 2013, it says. And that's pretty, I think it might have even opened in 2012. But the point is that, ideas are, once they're in the public for everybody to use, and that's great. And so the question is always, what's next? What's the evolution? What worked? What didn't work? So when I show these projects, some of my current clients will see some things that have persisted. They've definitely evolved in over a decade of thinking about it. But, a lot of these things that did work are still working. And so, the co-working in particular was an interesting one. I think it's something that, the co-working that we put in there was not very fancy. It was not even very comfortable, but it was in a fantastic position. And so, all I'm really saying is that in these sort of behind the scenes videos, my intent is not to necessarily, I'm not revealing any real secrets here because most of this I've talked about before, but trying to go a little bit deeper with it. And so I think as I do other facilities, there'll be different focuses. For instance, specifically on climbing wall design in other facilities, in other construction issues and other design issues and other coordination issues, whatever it is. But I wanted to start with Somerville because that's where I started. That's where I was able to combine the sort of 15 years of work I had done previously as a climbing wall designer, as an architect, into a development project where we took it from walking that space back in 2010 to an open facility, imagining fundamentally what can this thing be. And it was a wild project, but a lot of the lessons I've learned, both good and bad, are still with me today. So that's why I wanted to share it with you. And if this is useful, if this is interesting, liking and subscribing to the YouTube channel and the video is fantastic. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you watching. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.